Hi, I'm Hannah Radke,
And I'm Angelica White.
and this is our analysis and PowerPoint slide for the article Sympathy for the Homeless. So just a quick overview, this article kind of focuses on two main points. The first one is compassion fatigue, which is essentially when people of the community, like social workers, media people, counselors, they encounter so much negativity and so much bad that they run out of compassion, or they get tired of extending compassion. And so the beginning of the article kind of touches on that. And then the study itself gets into an analysis of newspaper documents as well as some other media documents representing both views. So somebody who's in favor of helping the homeless and somebody who's not. It does that pretty balancedly throughout, but towards the end you realize that the author themselves is in favor of helping the homeless. So we kind of took that standpoint a little bit just because it was persuasive. It worked pretty well.
Yeah, so we'll be sharing the persuasive elements of this article along with the main points. Given the length of this article, we've constructed the PowerPoint around the most relevant information. So we highly recommend that you go back through the article, look more in depth after or during our video, given that we chose to focus on the main points of the article itself.
So the first thing we're going to cover is persuasion concepts. Lucky for us, the author literally put what they were going to talk about. He calls them rhetorical devices, but they're very similar. Cultural themes, symbols, and images, and of course we're going to flesh these out and talk about them.
So the first cultural theme is financial considerations. So the lack of financial stability within communities is a major part of why there are people without homes in the first place, and the advocates for the homeless recommended a varied form of actions ranging from personal changes to community changes. There are so many things that we can be doing to help the homeless, and there's so many things within the community that we can be doing to help them, by buying into businesses, mom and pop shops that are disappearing because of bigger corporations. And so the article and theme one of this article really goes into depth about, how we don't really consider financial differences in corporations and mom and pop shops, and how really we can change that, and we can work through that. So the second cultural theme is conflict among stakeholders. So we believe that there are those who believe that a war should be declared on corporations, while those in favor of the homeless seek change, quote, every step of the way, end quote. So I think it's really, this really speaks for itself. There is one side who wants war against the big guy, against the corporations, and I'll go into that a little bit more, while there are those in favor of the homeless to seek change down on the ground and to help those in need now, and not wait for a corporation to look down and start a change that way.
Absolutely. And this also goes into one of the actual movements that the article talks about called Not in My Backyard, which actually was a Christian movement about homelessness and saying, we're not going to allow this kind of suffering even in our own backyard. So continuing with the cultural themes, number 3 is physicality and the environment. We are flesh and blood creatures of the natural and built world. So this kind of paints a picture through actually most of our rhetorical devices, if you will. All of the cultural and symbolism and images painted kind of like the animal kingdom. So the corporations, the big guy, they paint the homeless as a lower life form or an animal, not even a human. And actually the homeless advocates and people who are homeless kind of fall into this as well, and they call their opponents monkeys and other things as well, essentially dehumanizing each other. But also the homeless use this to say we howl for protest, so they kind of use it to their advantage. Number 4 is legal aspects of the controversy. We are law followers or law breakers. So this is, again, another idea that all homeless people are drug addicts or alcoholics, or they did something horrible to get themselves into this predicament. But in reality, it's kind of mixed. Like you talked about, a lot of times it could be divorce. It could be a business failing. It doesn't have to just be drugs and alcohol. But people who are in this situation facing, immense hunger, elements, even death at times, are forced into corners where they feel like they need to do things that are against the law.
Yeah.
And so that does happen. Mental illness is also very common in this group, and that kind of plays into that. You'll see that a lot in the article. But there's also this idea that because these people are so desperate that they will.
Yeah.
And that's not always the case. And so we kind of put up this wall that, oh, they're homeless, they're going to, do this, that to me. Where in reality, that's not the case.
Right, so group comparisons, we are strangers to each other, and so this theme really speaks for itself. Our society has turned the phrase stranger danger into a phrase that has contributed to a lack of compassion for people that we don't know. And so I think that, we talk a little bit about walls and barriers that we've built up in order to protect ourselves and to protect our families, and I think that stranger danger has been turned into a bubble, and that we have turned into a society that isn't incapable of loving on strangers, but is more like taking it back. Like you take a step back before you talk to someone. You take a step back before you introduce yourself to someone. You think about it. You think through it. You try to understand it. Okay, what is my relationship with this person? How are we going to make this work? How are we not going to make this work? How do I not want to make this work? So especially with the homeless, this, there's so many different stereotypes and different, motives for them and who they represent and the group that they represent. And so, as Christians, though, we are called to love our neighbor. And I think that we forget that. And we're that fear of, because there are bad people in the world. And so, it's hard. It is hard. So going on to number 6, the distribution of community burden. We are lifters and carriers. So those who lift community weight and those who carry community weight differentiate due to one side lacking an appreciation for their community and those overcompensating for those who are lacking. So basically there's two sides, the lifters and the carriers. And it's your decision, it's our decision to decide what side that we're going to choose to be on. So are we going to lift our community up, or are we going to try to carry it on our back? And, with these two sides, there's differences because what are you lifting from the community? What are you trying to uplift? What are you trying to cover up with lifting? And then there's the other side of, okay, how are we going to carry this through? How are we going to make sure that this change occurs? How are we going to make sure that, this happens the way that it should? And there's an imbalance right now between the lifters and the carriers. And, we're trying to go through and bring back that balance and that need for that balance within our communities and within, the people that are homeless. So on to 7, a contest for victories. We are competitors, and you went into this a little bit more, Han, about that this paints the homeless as losers and the corporations as winners.
Yeah, this kind of goes back into this whole idea of the animal kingdom again. Like, you're going to paint it, and so there's this whole world that we've painted once more of sports competition, that the big guy, the corporations, the people with the money, with the resources are the winners, and the people who are homeless or those who advocate for the homeless are losers. And I don't quite understand why both the corporations and the homeless initiative, both, I guess you could say, absorbed this. They still use this. A lot of times it's just dehumanizing, I think, for both sides. And so it's interesting. This is a really interesting point to read. I would read more on this. It's quite interesting, and you kind of have to digest it for yourself. So moving on to symbols and symbolism itself. So there's this whole part of the article that sadly we're not going to be able to cover, but it's called the social construct theory of social problems. There's a lot of social in there. And it's the third insight in this, and it discusses symbolism. So this quote says, think of culture as an accumulated totality of organized system of significant symbols. So essentially it's kind of that same thing that we were talking about, like creating a world. And also something that we can focus on is that the homeless and people that aren't homeless have different perceptions of the world. Like, we don't see things the same way that somebody who's homeless sees them. And so it's really important to dial in that and recognize that, there's two very different mindsets and two different worlds, even for both sides. And then, of course, there are good and bad symbols of the homeless in both the media and in our world that we interact with every day. Something the study found that I thought was really important to pull out is that this is kind of where we went into the fact that the author themselves shows support for the homeless with this quote. Those who are indifferent to or oppose the development of humane and inclusive symbols of of homelessness and of community programs for the homelessness often have more money, power, and tricks than practitioners. So again, it's painting this bad picture, like the big bad guy, and then the little people who are fighting for justice. But I mean, you can figure that out for yourself.
Right. So moving on to images. Images are a part of our everyday lives. We are image bearers, image producers, and image seekers. So, as we evolve, so do our images and outlooks of those that we interact with, both corporately and personally. And I think this basically ties into everything that we do on a daily basis, with the social media aspect and the social media society that we live in today. Images are everywhere. And, as Hannah and I were talking about earlier, the images that we see impact the decisions that we make. If you want a burger, you're gonna want the one that looks good on the screen. Yeah. You're gonna want the one that, because of the words that they use, appeals to you the most. So we talked a little bit about how commercials do this, and how everyone can be involved, because nobody's sandwich, I don't care who you are, but nobody's sandwich looks like the sandwich that's in the commercials. Yeah. So, but I mean, it's real, and if it looks good, you're gonna at least try it, even if it tastes bad or if it's bad for you.
Or gives you food poisoning.
Yes.
Like McDonald's did to me.
Yes.
So things we can learn from this in a persuasive sense. So something that I pulled away from this, probably the most thing, is that words have such a huge impact, and I think we forget that a lot. And this goes hand in hand with the images and the symbolism that we were just talking about, that we can create this world, and we can just live in that and endorse that. And then, of course, in order to persuade effectively, we have to be intentional with our words, the images we use and create.
Right.
So this is kind of where I think they went a little bit wrong, because of the fact that they use such negative connotations and images and symbolism and words with the animal kingdom and the sports kind of thing.
Yeah.
I didn't really understand why they chose that out of everything else they could have chose, but it's effective. It sticks, right? You think about how dehumanizing the animal, painting people as animals is, how dehumanizing it is to paint people who are in a situation of homelessness as, losers. And so it's interesting to see how this works, because it sticks with us. And that's how, persuasive people get in. Yeah. And that's how we can learn from that. We pick things that are, hook that we can grab.
Exactly. So by creating these symbols and images, we are able to produce persuasive campaigns that resonate with most people. Obviously, there's always going to be someone that you can't reach. There's always going to be somebody that is cut off from you. There's always going to be somebody who sticks to their guns or whatever they want and says, no, this is not what I believe, so I'm going to stay on this side, and you and your group can stay on that side. And so, I think we've sort of talked about this in the sense of, persuasion is everywhere, images are everywhere, symbols are everywhere, and words are impactful, and all of these are intertwined into each other to create these campaigns.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening, guys, and good luck on your responses.
Yeah, thanks.